This is Lynn Fraser with the Killaby Center for Recovery and the Radical Recovery Summit. I'm excited today to be here with Dr. Heidi Green. And, one of the things that drew me to your work is the title of your book. So we could start there. Self Love and World Domination. That's
Yes.
interesting. And then, also just all the stuff about on your website about how you work with people. But let's just introduce yourself a little bit more, and how did you get to that title, and what is it that you do?
Yes. Okay. Wonderful. So first, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited about this and quite happy to be here talking to you today. So thank you. Um, so so I'm a clinical psychologist, and I work primarily in the realm of trauma recovery, and I use that term pretty loosely
Mm.
because I think as human beings, we all have had our own trauma, right? Life is traumatic, and a human being is hard, and
Mhm.
what I like to say is if you've made it to adulthood, you're a trauma survivor because
Ah,
it's quite impossible to be on this earth for that long and not experience some trauma.
that's true.
So a big part of what I do is helping to educate people about what trauma is, which is essentially any kind of distressing, painful, confusing, hurtful experience that the mind and body are not able to resolve. Um, and so when something happens to you and it feels harmful, irrespective of how big it is, because that's the word that people like to use a lot in therapy. I don't know if this was big enough to count as trauma. And it doesn't really matter what the situation is. It matters how you respond to the situation. And so if your response to something is to feel harmed, and when there isn't an opportunity in your environment or within your internal resources to resolve that harm, that becomes trauma that lives in your body, and it lives in your unconscious and sometimes in your conscious mind, and it impacts the way that you move through the world. I often refer to trauma as a lens. It's a pair of glasses that gets put onto us, and it filters everything that we see, and it filters the way that we receive information from people coming in, and the way that we respond with information coming out. And the work, I think, of trauma recovery is to first recognize that you're wearing this lens, to understand how did these lenses get put onto me? What does this come from? And then there's this kind of long period of recognizing that you're wearing the lenses, but you're not really sure how to take them off yet. And so there's this kind of beautiful but messy and difficult kind of internal struggle that you have, where you recognize that you've been traumatized. You know that you're responding to things in an unhelpful way, and yet you don't really know how to do it differently yet, because your cognitive capacities, your logical brain knows that, oh, this is a response from the past, but your physical body or emotional spirit hasn't gotten online with that cognitive realization yet. And
Mhm.
so until we make that kind of head heart head body connection, we're just walking around knowing that we're not responding appropriately, knowing that we're not perceiving things appropriately, struggling with whether or not to believe our intuition, or whether or not to say, wait, maybe that's not a good intuition, maybe that's my trauma response. And so it takes a while to figure that out and learn how to trust yourself again, and learn how to trust others again, and learn how to regulate your autonomic nervous system again. And like I said, it's messy work, but it's beautiful work, and it's such a powerful, life changing experience for people. And when you ask how did I, get into this work, it was, doing my own trauma healing work, and it was the guidance of a couple really talented and compassionate therapists who helped me really recognize my own trauma story and do that reconciliation work. And when I got to the other side, I'd had such a remarkable transformation, that I knew I had found my calling. That's how I got into work and why I specialize in trauma, even though trauma can be a difficult and treacherous path to traverse with people. But I love it, and I think I have the best job in the world. It's just so fulfilling to help people come out of their darkness and back into the light. So, the title of my book, The Path to Self-Love and World Domination. I knew for a long time that I wanted to write a book. And so this book was kind of rolling around in my head for a long time. And you asked, where did you come up with the title? And I remember specifically the day that I came up with the title, because I'd been kind of mulling, ideas, book ideas around, but I hadn't really thought of like how would I bring it all together and what would I call this book? And I had not gotten to that point yet. And I was camping and I was laying in a hammock and I had my little cute little dog sitting on me. And all of a sudden it just came to me, Path to Self-Love and World Domination. And I was like, that's a weird title, but I like it. And it was, I don't know, it just felt like the universe like sent me this title. And as soon as I had a title, all of a sudden the book started coming together. And this book that I thought about writing for probably a year or two, all of a sudden started coming to life. And I took a day off of work each week so I could dedicate one day a week to writing. And bada bing, bada boom, the book was done in about 9 months. I mean, it just really flowed right out. And the purpose for me in writing this book was to help educate people about the way that trauma impacts them. This is actually why the word trauma isn't in the title, because so many times people come to therapy and I see people wanting to work on self-esteem. They want to work on communication. They want to work on anxiety and depression and these really common words that people throw out. And so they'll come into therapy and they'll say, this is what I want to work on. And lo and behold, almost every time, what I discover is that I'm sitting across from a trauma survivor. And I have to educate them because so many times people will say, oh, no, I had a great childhood, which is often true. For most people, a lot of childhood is great, and some of it's not. And we all come from, I like to say this too, which sometimes rubs people the wrong way, but I like to say we all come from dysfunctional families because people are dysfunctional, where nobody is this like perfectly healthy, self-actualized, human. We're all, we're all working on it, and we've all got our stuff, and we bring our stuff into our family, and our family of origin is the place where our kind of personal constellation of dysfunction shows up the most. And so as parents, we inevitably pass some of that to our children or grandparents or whoever it is that's raising you. They're an imperfect person, right? Or they're imperfect people, and they pass some of their own trauma from earlier in their life onto you. It's just inevitable. And it doesn't mean that you didn't have a great childhood, and it doesn't mean that your parents were bad parents. It just means that you were raised by humans, and this is the condition of being human.
Right.
So I encourage people to embrace the trauma that existed for them, rather than fight against it and try and protect the image of their family or try and protect the image of their early experiences, and to just be honest and authentic and say, yeah, a lot of it was great and some of it was really harmful. And of course, for some people, they have a very clear understanding that they had a traumatic childhood, but not everybody does. Not everybody understands that I've had trauma, that I had trauma in my early life. And those traumas, whatever they were, if I got bullied at school, or if I had a learning disorder, or if I had a superstar sibling who I felt like I could never live up to, that all those things, they become part of our template for the world. All that rapid brain development that's happening in early childhood, it gets set in. And then we take those experiences and we take the messages from those experiences into our adulthood. And that's really the piece that I focus on, is what did you make up about yourself? What did you make up about the world? How did this experience imprint upon you in a way that you're still carrying it around? oftentimes people will say like, oh, I'm over that, I never think about it. And I'm like, yeah, you don't have to think about it. That's the event itself is no longer the point. The point now is the message that you received and the message you're walking around the world. And so that's what I do in my work with clients. And that's what I try and help people understand in my book, is that the things that keep you from fully loving yourself, the things that keep you from being the person who you want to be and dominating your own world, which is really what I'm talking about. I think my first line in the book is a disclaimer that you're not going to achieve actual world domination, but that rather you're going to be able to love yourself and be the master of your own destiny, take your own life back. And that's really what the heart of this book is about. Understanding your experiences, understanding your story, understanding that whatever you're struggling with right now makes complete sense. It's not because you're innately defective. It's not because something's wrong with you. It is because your story led you to this moment in time. And there was no other way that you could possibly be right now than the way that you are based on your life experiences. And that's okay. And now is the moment where you can start to change this story and have an impact on how this story plays out from this moment on. And so we do that work by understanding our history, by using that cognitive capacity that I talked about earlier to help those younger versions of you that still live within you understand what happened, understand the reality of it, what it actually meant, and to give yourself the loving kindness and support that you may have needed but didn't get at the time to help you reconcile it. I put together this workshop called The Art and Science of Self-Love. And as I was putting this workshop together, I decided to run a little experiment based on a hypothesis that I have, that we all come into the world fully with the capacity to love ourselves, that we do love ourselves, that we like ourselves innately, and that it is our life experiences that shift that natural state of self-love. And so I asked friends who had children, kindergarten and below, to ask their children what they love about themselves.
Oh,
And I got all kinds of incredible answers, some that were very touching and heartfelt, some that were just adorable and hilarious. One of my friends' daughters said that one of the reasons she loved herself is because she would make a good cat. And I thought, yes, you would make a good cat. That's amazing. So like all good scientists, I got all my friends together and I said, can I experiment on your children? And they gave me permission. And so they put together, some of them put together posters, some of them put together lists, right? But some of them made videos that they sent to me. So I got all kinds of juicy, yummy data about how young children feel about themselves and why they love themselves. And two of the responses I thought were so profound, I highlight them at the end of this workshop. One of them came from my own nephew, my sister's son, who was, I think, 3 or 4 at the time, and he was really a stinker at 3 or 4. Kid, real cute, real stinker. And he said that he loved himself because he was so nice to his family. And I thought, well, this is interesting because I know this guy and I'm a part of his family. He's not always nice to everybody. But what stood out to me was that he felt that he was nice to his family because his family was so nice to him. And so he took that on. He felt all that kindness and love coming at him, and he internalized it, and he made up that is what he was, because it was what he was receiving. And then you can flip that, right? You can look at another child who's not getting that constant love and kindness and validation and support from the outside. And what are they going to do with that? They're going to internalize that, and they're going to tell themselves that they're innately not lovable, that there's something wrong with them, right? That the people around them are mean to them because they're bad. So I just think it was such a telling example of how, we come in kind of ready to believe anything about ourselves, and depending on what kind of information we get in, it shifts who we become and how we perceive ourselves. And the other one, that I thought was really phenomenal came from a friend of mine who's a therapist, and so I know she's doing an extra excellent job helping her daughter learn from painful experiences and turn them into meaningful and empowering experiences rather than holding on to that trauma and allowing it to stay unresolved. And here was the story that came from her answer. Her answer was, I love myself because I love my beautiful black skin, and because I stick up for others. And this is so important because, as the fates would have it, a few days before I asked her to ask her daughter this question, her daughter had been bullied at school. Again, she was only 5 or 6 years old, and a child at her school told her that he hated black people, and this is a girl with dark skin.
Right.
And there were some other friends that were also children of color, that he said this to. And my friend's daughter advocated. She went to the teacher, she went to her mother. She knew that she could trust people in her environment because she had that loving, trusting environment. And so she went to all the people that she knew would help her. And in fact, they did, right? The teacher brought in the child, got the child's parents involved, an apology was made. Her mother was able to kind of explain the way that racism can look in the world and help her understand that has no reflection on who she is, what she looks like, what her hair looks like, what her skin looks like, that she is still a valuable, beautiful, important person who has the power to help others, who can look at a potentially harmful situation and advocate for herself and advocate for her friends and make people feel better as a result. And so rather than feeling traumatized by this incident, rather than her again internalizing that message and believing that something is hateful about her because of the color of her skin, she felt empowered. And I imagine that this isn't going to be a trauma that she has to work through in therapy later in life because it was reconciled appropriately at the time. And that's why I always say it doesn't really matter what the thing was in the past, because humans are resilient and we
Yeah.
can heal from just about anything if we get the kind of support that we need at the time. And when we
Mhm.
don't, that's when things stick with us and end up interfering in us being our best selves later in life. So that's why I feel so passionate about this work, and why I felt it was so important to write a book about this work, because of course I'm only one person and I can't impact that many. I can't have everybody in my therapy office,
Right.
but I can at least spread this message to help people understand why they struggle with the very specific things that they struggle with, and how they can break free from those trauma beliefs, those self-limiting beliefs, and how they can see themselves in a more accurate light, and feel empowered to do whatever it is that they want to do with their time on this earth. So that's my goal.
Well, there's a lot there that I'd like to follow up with.
Sure.
So one is, I know that people are basically good
Yes.
and that we believe things about ourselves based on our experiences. But I never thought about children love themselves until something happens that gets in the way of that. So
Mhm.
what a wonderful foundational belief that we come into this world loving ourselves.
Yes, and I think it's so important because many of the people that I've worked with, when I ask them to kind of go back in time and think about, when they maybe felt differently about themselves, those who have been really deeply traumatized oftentimes can't identify a time where they ever loved themselves. They're as far back as their memory goes, they only remember their trauma, and they only remember the messages from those trauma experiences. And that's why I think it's important to be able to say, listen, you don't remember your whole life, right? There was a time that you came into this world with all your innate goodness, all your innate talents, all
Mm.
your innate capacity to feel and love and to be loved, and somehow along the way that got distorted, and for some of us it got distorted really early, but that doesn't mean that it didn't ever exist and that it isn't our innate state. And so I often refer to therapy as a journey back to yourself. You have to go back in time and rescue that little person. And sometimes we're going back and we're rescuing an 8-year old. And sometimes we're going back and we're rescuing a 3-year old. And sometimes we're going back and we're rescuing an infant. Um, and and I think that it can really instill hope for people when they know that they didn't enter into the world defective, but that rather they entered into the world with all this innate goodness that, in their story, unfortunately, got squashed and
Mm.
distorted pretty early. But that person is still in you because you are every age you ever were. So no matter how old you are, no matter how early that trauma started, there is still that 8-year-old in you. There's still that 3-year-old in you. There's still that infant in you, and that child's goodness still exists in you. And we just have to go back in time and find it and foster it and allow that to grow up with you.
And it's such a profound difference. Somebody who has the experience, like your friend's daughter, of something bad is happening, and she trusts that if she asks
Yes.
for help, she'll get help. And
Hmm.
who have a lot of trauma don't trust that. I certainly never occurred to me to tell my parents what was going on, let alone ask for help. And then they gave me evidence. In fact, they were just going to send me away once they found out what was going on. So that's
This,
so much
uh,
common.
thank you for saying this because so often when people come into therapy, they're actually upset with themselves for having not told anyone, and they'll say to
Mm,
themselves, oh, I was so stupid. Why wouldn't I tell somebody this? And I have to always kind of coach them the way that you just described here, that children are very smart.
mm,
Are incredibly intuitive. All children are doing in these early years is taking information in and trying to figure out what it all means, right? And so
mm,
intuition is strong in those early years. And children know if somebody is safe to talk to. They know whether or not their parents are going to protect them, whether or not their teachers are going to protect them, whether or not a coach or a mentor or an aunt or an uncle is going to protect them or not. They know
mm,
innately. And so
mm.
when a child doesn't tell an adult that something bad has happened, that is always a reflection of how the adult is showing up with the child, and not a reflection of the child's um, the child's uh, what's the word I'm thinking of right now, the child's smarts, right? Because that's what they're thinking. They're thinking, oh, I wasn't smart enough to know that I should have done this. And so we'll talk through it a little bit. Okay, well, let's imagine that you did tell your parents or your grandparents or whoever you lived with. What do you think would have happened? Well, and, and then we come around to it like, so actually you were pretty smart. Sounds like you knew exactly what you needed to do to be able to survive that situation and to get out as unscathed as possible. Sounds like it would have been a lot worse, maybe, if you would have said something. People don't often make these connections on their own. They just go right to that belief that there was something wrong with them.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
we have to undo that.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
When people think about therapy, they often think about talk therapy.
Yeah.
So, how did you go from and maybe you could reflect a little bit on the whole, industry or the whole profession of therapists. I've just seen so much more trauma, informed therapy and so much therapy that's not just talking. It's really working
Yes.
body. So what are you seeing there?
This is a really exciting time, I think, to be a therapist because the climate has changed a lot. I mean, there was a time where psychologists and therapists were trained to be a blank slate, right? And we're not going to show a lot of emotion, and we're not going to disclose anything about our own lives, and it was very clinical. And we have moved so far away from that now, where therapy is far more humanistic, where we get to show up in the room as human beings, and we
Mm,
get to show our own emotions, and we do get to talk some about our own stories if it's relevant and if it's therapeutic for the client, right? um, and only then. Otherwise you might have a therapist that needs to work on their own boundaries. But
yeah.
in an ideal situation, right, they're showing up as a human, and they are connecting with you on a human level. And when we talk about being connected on a human level, that means that we're not just in our cognition taking notes and not making any facial expressions and analyzing you, right? We're not doing as much psychoanalysis as, even it still exists, but not as much. Um, and what really is becoming more popular now is looking at people in a holistic view, where we're paying attention to their body responses and their body memories and the ways that their body holds trauma, and helping people release trauma in lots of different ways, not just through talking and staying up in your head, but rather releasing things physically, somatically, emotionally. We're using a lot more music therapy and movement therapy and art therapy. And honestly, we talk a lot now about getting people out of their head because you can talk and talk and talk for years and years about your trauma and never resolve it because it all stays here in your cognition. And the problem isn't that you need to talk about it more, that you haven't talked through it enough. The problem is that what you know in your cognition is not connected to your heart and your body and your soul and your spirit. And until we get that communication happening from, we talk about it being top down, right? We got to move out of here and move into the body, to really be able to release trauma in a complete way. um,
Mm,
so that kind of top down and bottom up work that we do, to get the mind and the body and the spirit all connected, are are some of the most important things that we're doing now in therapy, which is
mhm.
really exciting. And it allows us to be creative. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about getting in a room with somebody, is that I'm not ever just following a standard protocol. I'm getting to know this person, and I'm getting like a human to human feel for this person, and I can sit with them, and then we can talk about, based on what you're telling me and based on what I'm noticing about your personality and your energy, like, here's what I think would work for you. And we really get to tailor and customize therapy now for each individual person's needs. And it becomes a far more powerful experience. And of course, we're talking, I mean, we're still talking.
Sure.
We're not only talking, and we're not missing all those important pieces by doing nothing but talking.
Right. So what does it look like? I know it's different for everybody, but what does it look like when you work with somebody? What are some of the tools that you use and some of the ways that you get people down into their body?
Sure. So you're right. It depends on the therapist, right? And it depends on what kind of training they've had. Because when you become, I mean, I can only speak for psychology. So if you get a doctorate degree in psychology, you learn like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And when you get out into the world as a licensed psychologist, you know a little bit about a whole lot of stuff. And so then you have to decide, right? Where do I want to specialize? What am I passionate about? And then you have to go out and you have to get additional training. So there's lots of super cool um, uh, specialized training programs for therapists who are interested in trauma. There is somatic experiencing, which is all about feeling the trauma in the body and moving trauma out of the body. There's internal family systems therapy, which is all about understanding the different parts of you that came together during your early life experiences and being able to integrate all those parts into a healthy person. And the one that I use primarily is EMDR. Which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which sounds very clinical, but essentially what EMDR does is it mimics the process that happens in our brain during REM sleep. So you know how during REM your eyes are darting back and forth really rapidly, right? And so that process is creating what we refer to as bilateral stimulation in the brain. And basically, that means that when your eyes start this way, this entire hemisphere of your brain lights up. When your eyes start this way, this entire hemisphere of your brain lights up. So as you're sleeping in REM, your brain is firing like this. And what's happening is that your left and right hemispheres are getting integrated during sleep, and you are doing your best problem solving at that time. I actually think it's why we intuitively say to people, let me sleep on it. When
Okay.
we don't know the answer to a solution. That's my little hypothesis, because I think we actually know that our brains are problem solving best during sleep. And so in a world that's more ideal than the one that we live in, what would happen is if something happened during your waking day that was confusing or upsetting or harmful in some way, that you would feel the effects of that, both mentally and emotionally and physically, and then you would go to sleep and your brain would reconcile it, right? It would sort it and file it and make sense of it and put it away, and you would wake up in the morning, okay, and ready to go, right? Ready to have a new understanding about that. You've created whatever meaning is healing for you, and you move on. We don't live in that more ideal world, of course. And so, what actually happens for us is generally one of two things. Either the trauma that we've experienced is so intense, it's so far beyond what our brain could possibly reconcile during sleep that we get stuck. So if you've had extraordinarily traumatic experiences, um, in therapy, the example I often give to people is that, if you were living in New York City on 9/11, there is no way that if you were in Manhattan during that time, that your brain was prepared to somehow reconcile a trauma of that magnitude. It's just not, the brain's completely ill equipped to do that. So it would
Mhm.
make a lot of sense that you would go to sleep, your brain would work on it, but it would not know what to do, and that you would end up with some post traumatic stress, right? Because your brain couldn't reconcile it.
Mm.
And so, whatever the beliefs you are that you took from it, however it impacted your body somatically, whatever it did to your nervous system, it's still in you, it's locked in, and now you're stuck because your brain couldn't process through. The other thing that happens is that people have these traumas that are pervasive over time. So the brain can't reconcile it because every time you wake up in the morning, the thing is still happening. So even
Mm.
if it's not what we refer to often as like a big T, capital T trauma, if it's something smaller, like you're getting bullied or teased at school, you have a learning disability, again, like some of these things that I already said, you've got this superstar sibling that you feel like you can't live up to, whatever it is. These things don't feel wildly traumatic on a daily basis, but it's kind of death by a thousand cuts with these little t, small t, pervasive traumas. And so the brain, again, doesn't get an opportunity to reconcile it. And what happens instead, actually, is that the messages from these traumas are getting reinforced day after day after day after day. And so, again, your brain gets locked in and it can't do what it's naturally predisposed and designed to do, which is to heal itself every night and reset you. And so when the brain's not able to do that, we get these stuck points, right? We get these neural pathways that are a little wonky. They're off base from our reality, and so we're having these post traumatic stress responses and beliefs, and then we just keep walking through the world with them. So in EMDR, what we do is we get the brain firing bilaterally, the same way that it's firing during REM sleep. And then we go in with intention. We create a target and we intentionally go in and just focus on that target. And there is some talking involved, but a lot of it is just happening in your own brain. And so the way that it originally worked, and why it's called EMDR, is that therapists would hold up two fingers like this, and we would have you go back and forth. And so you would just do this, and your eyes would be moving as you would be thinking about an experience. And we got a little bit more technologically savvy, thank goodness, over time, because this isn't very comfortable to do for 8 hours a day if you're a therapist, and because it's not always the most comfortable thing for a client to do, and sometimes it's prohibitive, depending on the situation with your eyes. Or I know for me, it just gives me a headache, and it's actually harder for me to focus when I have to move my eyes. So I personally like to have my eyes closed during EMDR, and I will say that the vast majority of my clients feel that way too.
Oh.
So what we do now is a lot of therapists will either give clients little headphones that'll give them some little beeps, beep, 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 and that will create the bilateral stimulation. Or what I do is I give clients these little paddles. We call them buzzies. It's a very technical term, and they hold the buzzies, and the buzzies buzz, right? And so you get a little buzz, 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 buzz. And that way you don't have to do anything. Just like when you're sleeping, you're not,
Mm.
consciously moving your eyes, right? You're just relaxed and your eyes are closed and your body is just doing what it does and your brain is doing what it does and you're dreaming. And your dreams are these metaphors for the things that are going on in your life. And we don't usually, sometimes we have lucid dreams, but most of the time we're not controlling our dreams. We're not even aware that we're dreaming. The dreams are just happening like a movie. We're just, sitting back and watching and letting our brain heal itself. And so we like to get you into that state where your brain is firing that way and where you are relaxed and you are a curious observer of your own experience. So if we decide that we're going to target your childhood bullying, we would come up with a target, and that target might be a specific incident where you remember, maybe it was the first time that you were bullied, or it was the time that it felt the worst, and where the messages that you took in about being not likable or not lovable, or that there was something wrong with you, felt the strongest. And so we'll kind of set that scene, and I would have you hold on to the buzzies and close your eyes, and you would just go there, and then you would start to free associate the same way that you free associate during REM sleep. And
Mhm.
I'll stop the buzzies, every so often so that I can track with you and we can talk about like what's coming up and what are you noticing? What are you noticing physically in your body? What are you noticing emotionally? And so we're not just talking about what are you making up. We are talking about that, but we're connecting all these other pieces and what's happening in your body and what emotions are you feeling right now. And they'll explain to me what's happening. And most of the time, I don't give them a lot of direction. I say, okay, go with that. And I turn the buzzies back on and we keep doing it because I don't want to interfere too much with what the brain is doing because I know that the brain knows how to heal itself.
Right.
So I want to let that process unfold organically. But sometimes we get a little off track and we'll come back, or sometimes somebody's having a hard time just relaxing and letting it happen, and they're judging what's happening, or they're trying to make something happen, and I have to kind of get them settled again and get them to just let it flow. But once it starts flowing, it is a beautiful and transformative process. Oftentimes there's a lot of emotion in EMDR. People often get to a state of deep, heavy crying, or they'll get really angry, or they'll get really scared and ball up, and it's this incredible process of like mind and the body and the heart all working together, and there's an expression that happens during this oftentimes.
Mhm.
And then what happens is that after your therapy session, you go to bed that night, right? And you sleep that night and you enter into REM sleep. And because this was a thing that happened during your waking day, now your brain is still working on it. And often the night of EMDR and the night after, your brain is still working on this. So what often happens is we'll have an EMDR session and somebody comes back in a week later and there's been a shift. And maybe they didn't even notice that there was a shift. But when we go back in and we start to do EMDR again, all of a sudden they feel differently, or they're noticing different things, or the power that they felt, like that physical sense of dread, or that tightness in their chest, or whatever it was that they were feeling, all of a sudden doesn't feel that strong anymore. And what I really like about EMDR is that it's a lot faster than talk therapy. You can be talking something out for 2 years in therapy, or you can work on something for 2 months in therapy and feel permanently resolved about it, because we've actually changed the neural pathways, and we've created a new pathway that has a different belief about this trauma that happened. And we get you to that state, kind of like my friend's daughter, where the bad thing happens, but it gets reconciled, and she's able to attach a meaning that feels good for her, and she's able to move on with her life. And so that's why I talk about, it being a journey back to yourself, because we have to go back in there, and we have to give you what you needed at the time so that you feel resourced and reconciled, so that you can move on with healthy, appropriate, helpful messages, rather than the ones that you took in at the time. So that's the one I use. I love it. I've been both a client of EMDR. I've done a lot of my own EMDR work, and I've seen it play out with people in such powerful ways that it's the one that really speaks to me. But there's lots of super cool um, uh, therapeutic techniques, and that's the great thing about therapy, is that you can find a therapist who's got the skill set that you personally are looking for, and you can do the therapeutic techniques that personally work for you. And so it's just neat that so many of us are able to offer very different things, and find the right people, that are really the right people find us. and um, and we all get to be helpful in our own unique ways.
Mm. So let's circle back to just the brain of a child and the brain
Yeah.
of an adult, and how our brains, and this is something that I had an experience with concussion with someone close to me,
Ah.
and it was like the brain knows how to heal. And I also had PTSD after an assault, and it was the brain knows how to heal. We need to just let the brain have the conditions that are best for that, and the brain knows how to
Hmm.
heal itself. So as a child, though, what you're that powerful story about connection of that girl who knew she could trust because that was her experience.
Right.
So if she had had a different experience, and like many kids do,
Yes.
so her neural pathways in her brain would not have been for trust.
Right.
So with EMDR, we go back and rebuild and kind of correct some of the
Hmm.
disconnect from childhood. Is that what happens?
Spot on. Yep.
Right. And
Right. We
so
create what we refer to as reparative experiences. And so we go back in time, and we have these corrective or reparative experiences. And it's interesting because oftentimes what people come up with, they really get to use their own imagination during EMDR. So I've had clients come up with all kinds of very interesting ways that they reconcile things. Either their adult self comes in and has a conversation with the young child, or somebody in their life showed up differently, right? That coach or that parent or whatever, they were able to show up differently, and they can imagine that experience. And and some people who are a little bit resistant to this technique will say, but it doesn't, like, that didn't happen. I can't go, like, it was what it was. And I can't go, I don't want to imagine that something happened that didn't happen. And
right.
that's where that psychoeducation is important, because it doesn't really matter what happened. It matters what it meant to you. And so all the distress that you're feeling now, all the negative beliefs that you have now are coming from within. So healing is going to come from within too. So
Mhm.
actually happened doesn't need to have a hold on you, because what actually happened is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. We're here right now, and we're living right now with the impact of it. And so we can do whatever we want with the impact of it. and,
Perfect.
and we can heal that in any way that makes sense. And so if it works to imagine that you could go back and scoop that child up and take them out of that situation. Or if it works, to imagine yourself burning that house down where all that terrible trauma happened to you, which I've seen happen on more than one occasion in EMDR. Great, good. I mean, you're not actually going to go and arson that house, but being able to have that experience, that physical experience and that emotional experience of being able to torch, that place of your trauma, um, it has a transformative impact on you, because all that exists now is the memory of it and the impact of it and the imprint of it. And so when we give our brains permission to heal themselves, they will. And where people get stuck is that they use their mind and all their conscious thought to interrupt the healing process, because
Mhm.
they have all these negative self-beliefs and they have all this doubt and they have all this bias and all these other things that are getting in the way. And when somebody can give themselves permission to push all that stuff out of the way and just let the brain do whatever it is that it needs to do, without judging it, that's when people heal.
Right, right. And I loved what you said about all of ourselves at all the different ages is still inside. So what does that look like? Not necessarily with EMDR, but what does that look like as you're helping somebody to go back and feel safer as a 3-year-old or as an 8-year-old?
Hmm. Hmm.
What kind of
So, one of the things that I think is really important is being able to have a loving relationship with your younger selves.
Mhm.
I'm a mother of three daughters, and I always like to say that my first little girl was me, and I have to be able to love little Heidi the way that I love my other three daughters, right? And that it really isn't until you can love your child self as much as you would love your own child, or a child that you care about, here in the world, until you can see your young self like these other children, who you love and care for. It can be tricky to actually get back and feel safe and do that healing work, because people have all these preconceived notions about their young children, right? And we kind of referred to it before. I was so stupid. I should have done this. I should have done that. I brought this on. It was because I did this that person harmed me. If it was a learning disorder or getting bullied, there was something that was because of me. That was because that little kid was unlikable or weird or whatever. And so people have a really hard time embracing and loving those young versions of themselves. And so I don't think that we really get to a place where we can help soothe and allow those young versions of us to feel safe until we can say, I see you. I see you, little Heidi. I see you, little, 8-year-old self or 3-year-old self. I see you and I love you and I'm here for you. This version of me, this adult version of me is here to protect you, because I know that you're still in there and I know that you have that hurt and that fear, but I am going to protect you now. And until we can come to that place of um, of self love as it applies to loving every version of us, right? Love isn't just about loving yourself today, it's about loving every version of you that ever existed, because all
Yeah.
those versions still live inside you and they need you. Because today you are your oldest and wisest self. And
Mhm.
so that oldest, wisest version of you needs to be able to show up for all those younger versions that live within you. And so that's where we really start, is being able to have an unconditional love for every version of you that has ever been, so that you can come to that part of you when you need to, and be able to say, yes, I see you and I know what you need and I'm here for you now to give that to you. And it's very, very powerful.
It is, yeah. And like you say, it can be hard for people to let go of that resistance to that and to actually really
Hmm.
connect. Yeah.
Yeah. And it feels cheesy sometimes, right? When I say, put your hand on your heart and refer to yourself as little, Lynn,
Yeah.
and say to little Lynn, I see you and I love you, and I'm going to take it, especially men. They're like, what?
Yeah.
But we get them there because it works. And
Yeah.
when you really have decided that you want to heal and you're ready to heal and you're ready to let go of all these ideas that you think work, but clearly don't work because you're here in my office after doing it that way for the last 20 years. So why don't we just try something different and see what happens? As soon as we get the buy-in, it is universal. I mean, it works for everyone because at the end of the day, it's our most innate need to be safe and to be loved and to be cared for. We are social creatures that come into this world small and vulnerable and completely unable to care for ourselves for many, many years. And so it is the human condition to need love and care and tenderness and safety from a stronger, wiser other. And sometimes we have to become that stronger, wiser other for ourselves. And when we do that, then we create an internal dynamic that allows us to find that out in the world. So that person who feels like they've never been able to trust anybody all of a sudden can find and attract and maintain relationships with people who are trustworthy because now they feel deserving of it and they know what it looks like and they're able to give it to themselves. So they're also able to give it to others and have these beautiful, healthy, reciprocal relationships. So the transformation that happens during trauma healing is just it's the most beautiful, remarkable thing in the world to watch, and it's why I think I have the best job in the whole world.
That's awesome. So, one of the things that you talked about in your world domination
Yeah.
is your toolkit. So, just for people, I
Hmm.
can't can't spend time with you in person here, but what would you suggest for people that might be struggling or that are partway along this, or as it relates to addiction, even? But what would you suggest for people? Or a couple of things they could take away to kind of get started on this.
Sure. So the idea, well, first of all, I would suggest that you get my book because
Yeah.
I just read it all. And the book is set up in two parts. The first part is kind of building your understanding and getting to realize like why I am the way I am. I talk some about addiction in the book because I've never met an addict who didn't become an addict because of their trauma. You know, I refer, to a concept that's not my own, but that I love and have fully embraced. That trauma is chronic comfort seeking. Or that addiction is chronic self comfort seeking, and people don't need to chronically comfort seek if they're not traumatized, right? Like that's what creates that in somebody. So addiction absolutely is born out of trauma and is the brain's way to try and protect itself from the trauma. In the second part of the book, I offer a lot of techniques, some that you might want to do with a therapist. So if you have a therapist, it can be very helpful, even reading the book and then sharing some things. I talk about how to put together a trauma timeline, which oftentimes people would rather do with a trained person than do on their own. So if it's something that you and your therapist haven't done, you could introduce it to them and they certainly could do it with you. I talk a lot about the different negative beliefs that people have and kind of where those particular beliefs tend to come from and how you can begin the work of shifting that. But I'm very clear that a self-help book in and of itself is not going to change your life, that you cannot just read the book or read any book, a number of books, and have that in and of itself change you. Trauma healing is work. And so it's a very active process where you are intentionally working on changing your belief systems, changing the chemistry that's happening in your body, and it's hard work and it takes time. And I always tell people you're going to be bad at it, and like anything else that you try. If I give you a book on how to speak Mandarin, guess what? You're going to be bad at it in the beginning. If I plop you down in front of a piano, you're going to be bad at it, which is fine. But you have to be able to see it that way. That no self-help book can throw some techniques at you and you try it once or twice and you think, well, that didn't work for me. One more thing that didn't work. No, it's a journey, it's a process, and it's a work in progress. And in the same way that it will take you years to become a concert pianist or a fluent Mandarin speaker, it's
Right.
possible that it's going to take you years to undo all the garbage that you learned in all your painful experiences and become this healthier version of you that you want to be. So self-help books are great, techniques are great, therapists are great, but it usually, trauma healing kind of takes a village. You gotta be working with other people, and you have to have accountability, and there have to be people in your life who you trust to kind of sort through things with. Because in the beginning, like I said, in the beginning of our session, part of it is like learning how to trust yourself again. Like, do I trust
Right.
this thought? Is this a trauma thought? Is this a healthy thought? What is this?
Mhm.
Sometimes you won't know in the beginning. And so having a community of people that can help you kind of objectively see things is really important too.
Mhm.
I do have a quiz on my website that is free for anyone who doesn't have my book or want it. You can at least go on my website if you want to, drheidigreen.com, and click the link for the book. And down at the bottom, there's a link to take this quiz that I created that will help you identify your negative core beliefs. And knowing what that is, like what's that driver? Is it that I believe I'm unlovable? Is that I believe that I'm permanently defective? What is it that, like, at my core, I believe about myself? That is that lens that I'm wearing that's coloring everything I perceive out in the world. And once you have that, now you have the foundation. Now you know what you're up against and what it is you need to dismantle and rebuild. And there are a lot of different ways to do it, to do that dismantling and rebuilding process. And it's you'll have to find what works for you because it's a little different for everyone.
Right.
At least you know what you're dealing with, right? You have a sense of like, okay, this was the impact of all that. And
Right.
so this is the beast that has to be slayed here so that I can
Mhm.
dominate my own world, right?
Yeah.
And when you get to that point, at least you have a path now. You have a direction, and that's step one.
And do you believe that everybody can heal?
I do believe that everybody can heal. And I believe that for a few different reasons. One, because we're designed to heal, right? Like our brain, it innately has functions that are designed to heal us. And so we are supposed to be able to self-heal in the same way that our body self-heals. Um, Not always in a great way, right? Like if you have a compound fracture in your leg and you don't go to the doctor and you don't get it set right, it's going to heal. It's going to be super wonky, but it'll scar over. And so our emotional experiences are the same way. Some of our healing it gets done, it gets scabbed over, but the healing process was a little wonky, and we kind of need to reset that bone, right? Um, and so I do believe that everyone is capable of healing because we're biologically designed to self-heal. And I believe that everybody is capable of healing because I truly believe that everybody is innately good. Every one of us wants to be loved. Everyone wants to be loved. Everyone wants to give love. Everyone has love to give. We again, because we're social creatures, we are designed to care for and be cared about. It is in our makeup. And so nobody wants to be bad. Nobody wants to be the bad guy. Everyone wants to be good and feel good and give love and receive love. That is our natural state. And so trauma can disrupt that natural state, and trauma healing brings everybody back to that natural state.
Well, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Heidi, for being here and sharing your insights and wisdom and the path to world domination.
Yes. Well, it's been a real pleasure, and this has been a very fun talk. So thank you so much for allowing me to share all my passion with you this morning, Lynn.
Thank you. Welcome to the 2021 Radical Recovery Summit, presented by the Kilby Center for Recovery. This is Lynn Fraser, your moderator. This year, our theme is Feel It, Heal It, a new paradigm of recovery, featuring a diverse group of thought leaders and innovators, people who are working on the ground in the new field of addiction recovery. go to radicalrecoverysummit.com to sign up and watch free.